The cool mountain air ruffled my hair and caressed my face as I climbed the slope of a Wyoming canyon. The earth was emerging from night, being birthed into a new day by the dawning sun. Transfigured at night, the world of darkness coming to light again reminded me how mysterious and primal the raw world is when we step away from screens and skyscrapers. Reality is experienced through many lenses. In this 21st century of ours, a denial of reality touches realms of human life as disparate as nutrition, marriage, and politics. As men and women convinced, among other things, that reality is real, that the sun will shine tomorrow, that this speaker is a man and not a woman, we have to ask ourselves how and why we know what we think we know. More specifically, if thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, and Aquinas were onto something in their descriptions of reality, and if Christianity is unique in the history of humanity, in the truths it communicates, we ought to find as many ways as possible of supporting the truth of what our religion claims. This search deserves recourse to as many types of knowledge and modes of knowing as possible. Not all problems are solvable via logical, linear argumentation. First principles are themselves unprovable, at least using discursive methods, though by such methods one may defend them, especially by reducing their denial to absurdity via a reductio ad absurdum. Other modes, such as the intuitive, emotional, and sensory, must not be discounted. Indeed, nothing is in the intellect that is not first in the senses, as Aquinas says. And so the quality of our intellectual knowledge will depend to a large degree on the quality, range, and purity of our sense experiences. The priest-poet Jared Manley Hopkins speaks of this in Spring and Fall, a poem which explains the innate human sorrow at mortality through the lens of a child's grief at the passing of autumn colors. For Hopkins, when mouth or mind is unable to express something, the heart hears it and the ghost guesses it. Thus, on the one side, we have intuitive and poetic ways of uncovering facets of truth. On the other, we have the modern scientific method, a very different one, but, as I will argue, a complementary discipline. My purpose here, then, is to touch on how both the poetic and scientific can serve as acolytes to human reason and divine revelation. At Wyoming Catholic College, where I work, we speak of nature as God's first book. This idea originates with Maximus the Confessor, who writes that God is, in some ineffable way, embodied in the cosmos he has created. Because of this way in which the created world reveals truth as God's first book, written for mankind, I posit that insights from modern science, such as psychology, biology, and sociology, can be highly effective at supporting traditional, philosophical, and religious concepts, which read that same book of nature from poetic or philosophical angles. Conversely, the poetic way of relating to the world of things and persons, one might say a romantic or wonder-filled way, allows us to see them in a different light, one that is more qualitative, subjective without being false, and personally meaningful. If science looks primarily to what is it, or how does it work, other modes of knowing look primarily to what is it for, and why is it there, which necessarily bring in the notion of good and of love. When every discipline is integrated, our knowledge is fuller and may be more effectively communicated, especially to our contemporaries. It is indeed a development of doctrine in a certain sense, for how it works is indeed related to what is it for. If unintegrated, these disciplines may discover true facts, but will be of little use and could be harmful lacking the context of a larger whole. Let us look at a few examples. The discipline of modern nutrition reveals the faults of our current food distribution system, which that same science made possible through refrigeration, phosphates, and the like. While an Aboriginal tribesman might celebrate superstitious harvest festivals as food types wax and wane, modern studies indicate how the spectrum of our chemical needs change over the season in accord with the availability of various foods. Another example might be how the curing process applied to store-bought bacon is hardly what was once meant by curing. While the modern ills of capitalistic greed have led to these low-quality processes, the flip side is that analysis can tell us how unhealthy these corner-cutting processing methods are. Depending on whose interests modern science is serving, it can in fact begin to heal the ills it has created by diagnosing their causes with the same instruments which caused them in the first place. This leads us to another major area in which biology ought to support traditional philosophical and religious realities. Popular headlines make it sound like science favors contraception, homosexuality, or non-monogamous marriage. Yet much secular data is available and waiting to be drawn upon to show that such practices are physically and mentally unhealthy. Many studies, quietly and often despite themselves, point to the benefits of marriage traditionally understood and might be seen as a biological verification of a theology of the body. My own cursory research in this regard has revealed a handful of beautifully representative instances. Hormonal contraceptives increase the risk of breast cancer, while breastfeeding reduces that risk, a risk which decreases with each pregnancy. Scientists revealing the numerous drawbacks of hormonal contraceptives, as well as physical contraceptive devices, have begun in recent years to show the damage created by depriving a couple of the health-giving properties of natural marital intercourse, to say nothing of the grace-giving benefits of that act. For instance, while polyamory leads to increased rates of infection and disease, sexually monogamous relationships increase resistance to such maladies because of the immune-boosting qualities of repeated exposure to a single partner's sperm. Statistics regarding the correlation of stable marriages to child success and psychological wellness also reinforce age-old common sense approaches to marriage, while adding depth to these traditional views. Examples of such studies could be multiplied. Yet, love need not be only morally or molecularly examined. Poetry should teach us as much about love as anything else, indeed, more than anything else, as it reaches to a more personal or interpersonal level and goes beyond physical causes into metaphysical ones. This second acolyte or handmaid is worthy of many more papers and poems, but suffice to say here that poetic knowledge has to do with the communication of reality experienced rather than thought of in a vacuum. Texts like Homer's Iliad or Dante's Divine Comedy are not so much discursive and logical as intuitive and emotive. Along with activities like dancing, folk music, and stargazing, they can refresh and reform our imaginations by putting them in touch with the real in a way that air-conditioned movie theaters, artificially colored M&Ms, and techno-pop songs never will. Last year, I published an article on Crisis Magazine entitled The Universal Call to Hobbitness. In it, I discussed the terrible temptation to be distracted from our own precious plots of land by looking into our pocket palantirs, our phones, and beholding the forces of evil arrayed to destroy the world we love. While I have shown that science can in fact reverse or disclose some of the ills it has made possible, the power of science is all too often used in a dehumanizing, manipulating way. As much as philosophical and religious considerations ought to guide science, I believe the poetic mode can also be a guide, steering it in a wonder-filled, life-loving direction. It is humanity in its most fundamental aspects that needs to be saved today. Let us rediscover our families, our hearths, our fields, and ourselves by not being afraid either to contemplate the sublime realities of our faith, or to accept humbly and gratefully the most basic things of our embodiment, that soil in which the faith is meant to grow. To integrate poems, Summa Theologica articles, and microbial reports in our study of radiant life like morning kisses, scrambled eggs, campfire songs, homegrown vegetables, and crying children is to make us better lovers, better philosophers, and better scientists. It makes us, as the modern poet Richard Wilbur put it, one whose task is joyfully to see how fair the fiats of the caller are, namely God's ordering of our world. Despite the brevity of my examples, then, we conclude that science can lead to a rounding out of our perception of reality's realness, to use a John Senior sort of phrase. In this we see the psalmist vindicated. Veritas de terra orta est. Truth is born from the earth when we discover more about that earth. As Senior wrote in The Restoration of Christian Culture, quote, "There is something destructive of the human itself, in cutting us off from the earth from whence we came, and the stars, the angels, and God himself, to whom we go." End quote. I want to encourage and inspire a new commitment to drawing truth out of the earth in order to confirm the justice whose complete vision comes from heaven. See Psalm 84. These poetic and scientific ways of studying reveal aspects of our own telos, or end, as well as the wisdom of God's creation, but in different words and from different angles than, for example, Aristotle or Aquinas might do. The rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, the pretty fair maids in the garden, and all the other wondrous things that make up our world, can be contemplated from hormonal and hylomorphic lenses, through molecular and moral tendencies, through physical and philosophical rules, through atomic and eternal mysteries. The earth is full of God's glory. Let us use everything at our disposal to discover in mind, heart, and ghost how fair the fiats of the caller are. Thank you.